We're on the road with Street Racer on Atari Archive. Up to this point, every game highlighted on Atari Archive has been based on an arcade title. Tank begat Combat, from Anti-Aircraft came Air Sea Battle, Pong morphed into Video Olympics, and Indy 800 brought us Indy 500. But Street Racer is the first game that wasn't based on an existing Atari arcade game. Unfortunately, it's also one of the weakest titles in the 1977 VCS lineup. The game's creator, Larry Kaplan, said that Atari wanted a game that used the paddle controller, so he decided to make a driving game. Initially, he planned on doing a home port of the Atari arcade game Night Driver, but as someone else had already called dibs on that project, he had to come up with his own idea. In some ways, Street Racer resembles Night Driver, with the camera moved from behind the car to above it. Like Night Driver, you're limited to only moving forward along the road. You can't turn around and change directions like an Indy 500, but this also plays to the paddle controller's relatively limited range of motion. The similarities end there, however. While Night Driver involves moving a car along the winding track, Street Racer has players going down a straightaway. Other vehicles and obstacles serve either as hindrances that slow you down or as bonus points, depending on the game type. Street Racer does have the distinction of being an early split-screen game. One player drives along in the left column and the other in the right. As the paddle controllers come in pairs, Street Racer even allows up to 4 players at a time, with 2 players sharing a lane as a team. This doesn't actually work all that well in practice, but it is a neat idea. The game also includes a rudimentary 1-player mode, and though this basically consists of the computer-controlled car accelerating constantly without much effort to turn, it kind of works. Even though it was purely coincidental, Street Racer's default racing game type does bear some resemblance to this built-in Speedway game on the RCA Studio 2, which came out in February 1977. Speedway itself is similar to Taito's 1974 arcade game Speed Race, released in the US by Midway as Wheels. For those 2 games, players are dodging other vehicles to drive as far as they can to rack up points before a timer runs out. For Street Racer, the players get a point for every vehicle passed, either individually or as a team. Kaplan included several variations on the concept in his VCS game, some of which fundamentally change the game. There are some similarities though. All of them end either after 2 minutes and 16 seconds are up, or someone gets 99 points. And flipping the difficulty switches to Expert mode means you'll lose a point for every collision. They also have variations that have players dealing with 1 or 2 cars, or some other object, on screen at a time. For example, the default street racing game has options allowing for 1 player to race the computer, 2 players to go down their separate tracks to pass as many single cars as possible, or have 2 players deal with 2 other cars at once. There are also team modes with 2 cars on each track, or a handicap game of 1 car against 2. Before you get too excited, keep in mind that these are basically the exact scenarios that you'll see in each game type. In Slalom, the cars are replaced by skiers that are trying to cross between gates. In this particular game, not only will the difficulty switch cause you to lose points for each collision, the gates are narrowed. And other than that, you have the same team modes as Street Racer and the choice of 1 or 2 obstacles at once. Dodgem is an odd mode for 1 or 2 players where your car is driving up the road to the top of the screen before reappearing at the bottom. Meanwhile, obstacles that may be rocks or oil slicks or potholes or whatever will come down the road and send you back to the bottom if you collide with them. This mode has some gameplay resemblance to Atari's Space Race arcade game, and while the chunky cars make this mode kind of unfair, it is pretty different from the Street Racer game type. The rest of the variations get increasingly strange. Jet Fighter has 1 or 2 players firing at enemy planes that come cruising down the lane. Missing a plane will either cause you to lose time or a point, depending on the difficulty switch. It's a neat idea, but the paddle controller makes it pretty easy to line up a shot once you get the hang of how the enemy planes move. Number Cruncher might be the best game on the cart. Up to 4 motorcyclists are trying to pick up random numbers that bounce down the track, with each number providing its point value for your score, provided you can hit it cleanly. The game tends to be pretty hectic, and matches end quickly before they can overstay their welcome. The final game type, Scoop Ball, is actually an inventive little title. 1 to 4 players are trying to pick up balls in their front scoops. This only gives you 1 point, but you can earn 3 more by cleanly depositing the ball into goals that also appear on the roadway. Hitting the ball off-center or deposit without the ball, or also off-center, means you don't get any points. Unfortunately, even with all that variety, Street Racer isn't all that good. Kaplan himself has said the game didn't come out very well. Because of its vertical nature, he used low-resolution background graphics for the sprites instead of higher-res player sprites. He was also unable to get any kind of track elements into the game to show speed without it flickering, something he believes would have made the game play better. Kaplan has since pointed to David Crane's Grand Prix game that came out 5 years later as the realization of what he wanted to do with Street Racer. Strangely enough, Atari seemingly took Street Racer as it was in development and had it turned into a dedicated first-generation console. Alongside the VCS in August and September 1977, Sears published a console called Speedway 4, which included a 4-player driving game similar to Kaplan's VCS title. They also sold Kaplan's game as Speedway 2. Kaplan said he has vague memories of the Sears-published Speedway game being done by someone outside Atari's development teams. Sears also seems to have sold a 2-player dedicated console simply called Speedway in Canada that eliminated the 2 extra players. Unlike the VCS version, these dedicated consoles have scores popping up in the playfield and reportedly get faster paced, and they include a Pong game. The VCS game did have a much longer shelf life, however. According to internal sales data, Atari continued selling copies of Street Racer into 1988. The first 4 games we've looked at in this series can be considered all-time classics of the Atari VCS that most system owners probably have. Street Racer certainly doesn't achieve those heights, but it also doesn't reach the depths that some of the console's worst releases do. It's a pretty forgettable game, outclassed in what it does. Just because it crossed the finish line doesn't mean it's a champion. Next time, we're going to the stars on the first space mission in the VCS library.